Save Mount Diablo's story is about generous people preserving land for wildlife and everyone else in the Bay Area.
Imagine this tiny little organization that raised $26,000 a year, half of it from our co-founder, Mary Bowerman, had about 400 donors, and had built up a fair bit of credibility and some influence, but was mostly about encouraging other people to do things. And into that you throw me, this bulldog who's just shown up and is breaking China, who's this kid who's forcing us through all these incredible growing pains.
The organization has fearlessly stood up to powerful developers. It's lost some battles, but its story is mostly about finding clever ways to win against the odds. Save Mount Diablo's first employee, Seth Adams, makes it all sound easier than it was.
If you just sort of focus on trying to make things better, not necessarily on winning, but just trying to make things better, you'll have constant successes. And step by step, our Bonwell later said something that stuck with me. He said, you do anything for 20 or 30 years and you'll make a difference. And here I am at 30 years, and we really have made a difference.
Our mountain, Mount Diablo, that imposing 3,849-foot peak between San Francisco Bay and the Central Valley, has captivated people over the years.
Mount Diablo is a superlative place. It's where the world was created, according to Native Americans. It's important in early exploration, in manufacturing for lime deposits and coal deposits. It was the first initial point for surveying. It was used by all the European powers to survey the Bay Area, who were jockeying for control of San Francisco Bay. And an early location for tourism, one of the first 7 state parks in California. More than 10% of California's native plants are found just in the 20,000-acre state park. So it's an important place in all kinds of ways. Mount Diablo is visible for such a large area. It really is a definition of home for people. When you're driving back to the Bay Area or you're flying back in, people who live in the East Bay see Mount Diablo and they know they're home.
The problem for Save Mount Diablo is that powerful forces don't always see the mountain as this iconic, special place. When the organization was founded in 1971, Contra Costa County was the most pro-growth county in the Bay Area.
There were times where school kids would volunteer to sign signatures to stop a development like Blackhawk, and people would show up and turn the tables over. Because how dare you stop this project? It was tough.
In its first 16 years, Save Mount Diablo and its allies boosted protected lands on and around the mountain from 7,000 to 30,000 acres. But with an aging board of directors and developers eyeing the mountain on every side, they knew they needed to step up their game. So in 1988, they decided to hire an advocate. The kind of person they needed was clear to Robert Doyle, who was president of the Save Mount Diablo board at the time.
I really wanted a tiger. I really wanted somebody who had a fire in their soul to be able to take a lot of heat and be able to articulate the vision and articulate why this development shouldn't occur.
The way rancher John Ginocchio saw it.
Seth was a little bit of vinegar in there because they were pretty much, I don't want to say conservative environmental group, but they didn't like making waves. Seth made waves. Seth made no bones about it when he first arrived. He was a bulldog to be reckoned with.
Former board president Malcolm Sproul counseled Seth about picking his battles, but he never asked him to back off.
When you're involved in land use activities, you need somebody that's going to dig their heels in, not just roll over. There's too many people that want to be a good guy and compromise. And Seth would compromise when it made sense, but when it didn't, he'd say no. And people didn't like that. And he's our bulldog, and we need our bulldog.
Seth's journey to save Mount Diablo began as a curious kid in North Carolina.
I was always barefoot 9 months of the year. I spent all of my time outside catching things. Considering that it was a military household, my dad was in the Army, we were let to run wild. The rule was you had to be back home for dinner at dark, and even then I'd be gone after that, under street lights, catching frogs and toads and insects and things like that. So my parents gave me the garage when I was 8 to get the animals out of the house. We backed right up to woods. A mile away were ponds with bogs and carnivorous plants, and my parents were incredibly supportive. They basically let me design our summer vacations to go from one national park to the next, from one museum to the next. And then when I started getting jobs and making money, I joined environmental groups and bought more books. And so my heroes were Rachel Carson and John Muir and Aldo Leopold and David Brower and people like that. And I knew I was coming to California because I wanted to work with those people and deal with those organizations. And, you know, it was just inevitable.
Seth made it to California in the wet winter of 1981 and loved everything about the place. The weather, the wide open vistas, the politics. Almost immediately, he began working to stop the Peripheral Canal Water Project. He also set up an organization, the California Water Policy Group, which supported environmentalists running for local offices and opposed Los VAQUEROS Reservoir in East Contra Costa County and Buckhorn Dam in the Oakland Hills. He studied marine biology at UC Berkeley.
I went from Cal to auditing courses at Bolt and to working for an environmental law firm at the same time that I was working part-time for Save Mount Diablo. And yeah, my education was broad and unusual.
Seth was happy to be working for a conservation group, but he didn't yet know that Mount Diablo was anything special. It took time on the mountain for that to sink in, and he had some good teachers along the way.
A lot of times it'll sound like I'm talking about myself, but there's always this background of incredible board members and volunteers who've been involved with the organization. I was just kind of the spokesperson and the one who got some of the attention. But you have to start with the two most important people when I was hired by Save Mount Diablo, who were Bob Walker, my best friend, who was on the board, and Bob Doyle, who had been a founding board member and is now the general manager of East Bay Regional Park District.
In the late 1980s, the three friends would pore over maps together, figuring out ways to achieve Save Mount Diablo's highest priority, connecting Mount Diablo State Park to Morgan Territory Regional Preserve.
But we were also fighting some major projects. There were 5,000 or 6,000 unit housing developments proposed at every corner of the Mount Diablo area. We didn't even really know what we were talking about in terms of the Mount Diablo area at that time. And so I had a friend draw our first global strategic map. And it was a much, much bigger area than Save Mount Diablo had focused on in the past. And it was the beginning of a process of our expanding the area within which we work over and over and over, and gaining more influence and having more effect.
One of Seth's early battles over Crystal Ranch on the east side of Lime Ridge in 1989 set the tone for the organization for many years to come.
The cities would approve pretty much anything back then. Seth said, okay, let's organize the community to do signature gathering, to put it on the ballot in Concord, and it won.
As a result of that referendum, only half as many houses were built at Crystal Ranch as had been approved by the city, and 330 of the developer's 512 acres were secured for open space.
That's where Save Mount Diablo really started to change and showed that we were willing to go to the law and to the public. That to me was a game changer.
Another project that really is just pure Seth was Roddy Ranch. 1,100 and some odd acres of open space were created as a result of it. The proponents very much wanted a golf course. Jack Roddy had some political connections. We were fighting it, and they wanted it to get approved that day, And literally outside the Board of Supervisors chambers, Seth negotiated the deal. You know, he got a couple of supervisors, he got the proponents. He said, okay, we can live with this, but we really want the ridges surrounding the golf course and the connections up towards Black Diamond protected. And right there, they agreed to it. It was, okay, we want our project. You've got 1,100 plus acres of protected open space. That was quite a feat.
Save Mount Diablo got pretty good at fighting individual projects, but that was like playing whack-a-mole. So they looked for ways to make a bigger difference. They often joined with allies, like the East Bay Regional Park District, where Robert Doyle was rising through the ranks. And they worked with the State Parks Department, elected officials, labor unions, and city and county agencies. The organization wasn't against all development, but developers had been running the show for decades. Save Mount Diablo wanted to tip the scale toward nature and quality of life.
In 2004, we leveraged a big transportation measure with a lot of money against growth management, and we required that all the cities have urban limit lines and that they all be voter approved. So to change the urban limit lines now, you have to have a vote of the people. And that literally changed the complexion of the county from anything goes, something can be proposed anywhere, to really centering in on the cities as the place where development should be happening.
Save Mount Diablo joined with allies to create another powerful tool in 2007.
The East Contra Costa Habitat Conservation Plan, which is a plan to streamline endangered species permitting, is one of the things I'm most proud of. It forced a whole bunch of people to come to the table and come up with a community-wide plan for endangered species mitigation. And in its first 10 years, it's protected 15,000 acres of land, from Clayton through East County. So the east side of Mount Diablo, basically.
The Bay Area's generous taxpayers helped along the way.
We've seen money run out and things get dire, and then something else be created to fill in the hole or to be a stopgap. Right as state park funding was running out, we were able to pass a huge bond for East Bay Regional Park District. And as that was getting close to running out, we were able to create the Bay program of the Coastal Conservancy, strangely enough, which provided a lot of money around Mount Diablo. And as that was getting thin, we were able to extend the East Bay Regional Park District measure and also create the East Contra Costa Habitat Conservation Plan. So there's been not a steady amount of funding, but big pots of money created that we could tap.
Rancher John Ginocchio watched all this wheeling and dealing with amusement.
One of the gem things I've heard from Seth of all time was, I said, Seth, this county is just a checkerboard to you. It's a game of checkers. Seth said, John, you're wrong. The county is a chessboard. You got to think and plot and all that. Jeez, I'll never forget that.
In the late 1990s, the board decided to hire an executive director to strengthen the organization, while Seth continued his conservation work. The tenure of the first executive director was brief, but the second one, Ron Brown, presided over 15 years of rapid change. Under his leadership, Save Mount Diablo developed more sophisticated finance, outreach, fundraising, and communications capabilities. Seth was no longer a lone ranger. He was becoming part of a team.
The second executive director, Ron Brown, really has to be given incredible credit for building the capacity of the organization from an organization with 3 staff members to one with 17, and a real expansion of our programs.
I'm the facts and figures guy. I'm the expert on sense of place and properties and things like that. And Ron was much better with people. So he was much better at building personal relationships and then building trust to turn those things into accomplishments.
Many of the wildlife corridors that Save Mount Diablo and its partners have protected run along ridge lines. But during the Great Recession, they began working on something more difficult, establishing a corridor along Marsh Creek.
The second longest, least disturbed creek in the county on the east side of Mount Diablo. And during the recession, small properties down along the road and along the creek, which had been out of reach, 5-acre properties for $1 million, they plummeted in value. And we started picking up the small parcels, this necklace of little preserves along Marsh Creek, with the idea that if we just did this for 30, 40, 50 years, we would protect most of the creek. We wouldn't have to get all of it necessarily. You know, there's always going to be houses along Marsh Creek Road and Morgan Territory Road, but we would get a lot of it. And through large parcels and small parcels, we've protected 15 miles of 33-mile Marsh Creek. And from the road, you can create recreational connections, open space connections towards parks in every direction. And that's what we're trying to do.
Save Mount Diablo transfers most of its properties to park agencies. But in recent years, that's been harder due to budget problems in the State Parks Department. So Save Mount Diablo's holdings have grown from 1 or 2 to 20 properties. The organization has hired staff to patrol, maintain, and restore these lands. It's also trained an army of volunteers to help, and as it turns out, volunteers are good for the land and good for the organization.
When people actually sweat on a piece of property and help take care of it, they adopt it. And those people become amazing volunteers and amazing donors to Save Mount Diablo. So sweat equity is one of the best ways we know to get people committed to what we do.
Another kind of sweat equity involves hiking. Librarian Sharon Walters became a dedicated volunteer and later a board member after taking a hike. First, she went on a day hike with Seth, and then on 4 Days Diablo, a 30-mile trek on the Diablo Trail from Walnut Creek to Brentwood.
I mean, Seth is legendary. He's extremely strong and a great hiker and a kind person. He was great to see him around children or seniors. He has a lot of confidence in his ability and his knowledge of so many things, history and biology and botany. I just felt like most of us were sponges in his presence. We just couldn't hear enough or absorb enough.
Scott Hine and his wife Claudia both have degrees in chemistry and work full-time. They were introduced to Save Mount Diablo in 1999 when they were looking for a way to honor Scott's mother, who had passed away.
At that time on the Chaparral Spring property, they had a program where you could adopt a tree, and we decided that we would go out and find a couple of trees for us to adopt in honor of my mother. And so we met out at Chaparral Spring, and that was the first time we met Seth. And in Seth's way, we went in expecting to adopt a tree, and we came out adopting 2 groves.
Today, Scott is president of the Save Mount Diablo board, takes photographs, and helps lead 4 Days Diablo. Years ago, Claudia volunteered in the office, and now she's on the board too.
One of the things that I know has attracted a lot of people to the organization is it's an organization that accomplishes way more than an organization that size should. It's the people involved and the passion for the work.
Save Mount Diablo doesn't just celebrate the things the organization does all by itself. There are very few of those kinds of things. They celebrate all of the things they and their allies do together. And over time, their joint accomplishments have added up.
When I first started coming here 30 years ago, and Contra Costa and Alameda counties had 11 and 12% public lands compared to 33 or 35% now. The peak of Mount Diablo was public land. The little top of Morgan Territory Ridge was public land. And where you were standing here, there was some public land, but that was about it. And now it's all contiguous. We've gone from 7,000 acres when Save Mount Diablo was formed to more than 110,000 acres around Mount Diablo, mostly contiguous protected lands. That's an area bigger than Point Reyes National Seashore, an area bigger than the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, and it's increasingly part of this complex of parks that are being pieced together down the 150-mile Diablo Range on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. The threats have been fast and furious, but our progress has been incredible. The amount of public land out here has skyrocketed.
In the course of 30 years, Seth's life has changed. His primary relationship was with Save Mount Diablo until he met a caring young man named Aaron Chabot. They were married in 2015 and live in Martinez together with their dog Bolt. Seth's work life has changed too. Some of the management chores Seth used to do are now handled by Land Programs Director Meredith Hendricks.
I describe Seth as the tree that has spilled over the sidewalk, and it's at the point where you move the sidewalk. The tree is the tree, the sidewalk needs to move. I think of him as somebody who stands in his beliefs to the point where it doesn't really matter how somebody reacts to them. He's charming and dear, and he's impossible. And he's got some magic around Mount Diablo, and he loves when somebody comes to the table with a great new idea. It doesn't have to just be his.
Seth can still be a bulldog when necessary, or as Hendricks sees him, a well-rooted coast live oak. But thanks to time spent with Save Mount Diablo and the mountain, he sees the world differently. He once imagined sticking with the organization for 5 years or so. But now that he knows the mountain well, he feels it's a place worth devoting a lifetime to protect. He's also more devoted to the people who've been by his side all these years.
I started out as someone who cares a lot more about wildlife and places than I did about people. And that was apparent to lots of people in the beginning. But what's been amazing is just the relationships that have happened over the years. You go from being someone who really doesn't care that much about people to having a deep connection with them. At least people who are selfless and donate huge amounts of time and money to help with our cause.
And what is Seth thinking about strategy these days? He's still trying to make things better, one step at a time, with a bigger vision than ever.
The most important thing I've done is from the very beginning, I've pushed for Save Mount Diablo to be involved in a bigger area, time and time again. Sometimes people ask, how much do we want to save? It's not how much should we save, it's how much can we afford to lose. Save Mount Diablo has evolved and defined the whole concept of what Mount Diablo is and what its geographic extent should be. 100 years from now, I don't want a sea of development with islands of open space. I want there to be a web of interconnected open spaces. I want every person, every kid to live just a few minutes from an open space. I want a string of preserved land stretching the entire length of the Diablo Range.